Bart Schleyer was a famous outdoorsman, woodsman, hunter, as well as a playboy. He was a trained scientist who worked for the Grizzly Bear Recovery Project in Yellowstone National Park in the 1980s before moving north to Alaska. He was one of the world's foremost experts at capturing, radio collaring, and tracking tigers, and spent months in Russia working to help save endangered Siberian tigers. He also had a Russian girlfriend, Tanya Perova, and they had a son together, Artyom. Bart was born to Dr. Otis Schleyer and his wife, Lula Rose, in Cheyenne, Wyoming in 1955. Dr. Schleyer, a physician who practiced in Cheyenne, loved to hunt. He often took Bart along from an early age. Bart's sister, Claudia Downey, tells of Bart's childhood obsession with animals. He didn't just like them, he wanted to know everything about them, study where they lived and how they lived. My dad took Bart with him on safari to Mozambique when he was 10 years old. He had a chance to witness an incredible variety of animals that he could only otherwise read about. When he finally got a chance to hunt, he was drawn even closer. Hunting seemed to give purpose to his studies. Bart would draw pictures of animals and continued to develop as an artist into adulthood. Bart focused on his education on wildlife biology and transferred to Montana State University, where he received his master's degree in 1979. Professor Don Collins taught an undergraduate class called Man and the Environment for more than 20 years. Dr. Collins says, out of the 4,200 students who took that class, Bart was a standout. He was quite knowledgeable in everything wild, from animals and birds to flowers, trees, and shrubs. Bart spent a great deal of time alone in the mountains while working on his thesis, The Activity of Patterns of Grizzly Bears in Yellowstone. And it was as if he prepared his entire life to do this. He was superbly suited for the demands of the job. To conduct these studies, Bart used live capture techniques and then placed telemetry radio collars on the bears to monitor their activities. After college, Bart stayed in Montana where he worked for Fish and Game and the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team. He made vital contributions to a team challenged with determining the reaction grizzly bears demonstrate following encroachment by humans. And it was also important to know the habitat requirements and birth and mortality rates of the bears, including those living in the remote Bob Marshall wilderness. His experiences in backpacking and self-reliance fostered through years of bow hunting made the research work easy for him. He stayed out in the mountains for months at a time. Packing meat for bait and heavy cable for foot snares became routine. He didn't just endure physical hardship, he enjoyed it. Schleyer organized his life so that he could spend as much time as possible in the field, and he was about as tough as it gets when it comes to the outdoors. He would love using a traditional bow and the arrows that he would make himself. In September 2004, Bart went off for a trip in the Canadian wilderness. His last contact was on September 14th, when a chartered float plane left him at the larger area of the Reed Lakes in Canada's Yukon Territory. Reed Lakes is on the southern slope of the Selwyn Mountains, about 175 miles north of the town Whitehorse. The nearest settlement is Stewart Crossing, about 15 miles from the lakes on the road from White House to Dawson. When the plane returned 2 weeks later, the experienced woodsman was gone. Strange, as he was no city slicker and knew how to handle himself in even the most remote wilderness and could be described as a survival expert. He was well equipped for the trip, with 3 action packer crates with enough food for at least 2 weeks each, clothing, and camp gear, such as a tent and an inflatable boat. He was reported missing on September 30th, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police promptly launched a comprehensive search and found nothing of Schleyer. According to the RCMP, He had lunch or supper in camp since the remains were found and the rest of the food was still in the crate. He had used his boat and paddled it down the lake around half a mile from the camp. The Mounties thought there was a possibility Schleyer might have hiked out to the highway. However, with the deteriorating weather, they called it a day. Dib Williams, a friend of Schleyer's in Whitehorse, was dissatisfied with RCMP's efforts and got pilot friend Wayne Curry to fly them to the camp after they had departed. They found his tent had been knocked down, either by wind or animals, but all the equipment was there. They searched the area around the tent and found his backpack, bear spray, a knife, and a VHF radio. Williams and Curry got increasingly concerned, as they didn't buy the story that Schleyer had hiked out when he had left such key equipment behind. On the second day of their search, they found his boat near the inflatable boat, about 60 yards back in the woods from the boat on flat ground next to a thicket of black spruce and willow. The bow and arrows and a handmade buckskin quiver were leaned up against a tree next to a dry bag full of gear on which he'd probably been sitting on. Curtis, an experienced moose hunter, said it looked like the sort of place an archer might set up if trying to call a moose into range. A little further on, they found a camouflage mask with blood and hair on it, and at this point, they called the RCMP back to the area. On October 3rd, the Mounties, Yukon conservation officers, and civilian volunteers flew back to the area to begin more detailed grid search. At first, they found little but bear and wolf tracks, but then a baseball cap was spotted by the searchers, and then camouflage pants, a camera, parts of a skull, and just a few small bones. And all these items were 60 meters or so from the bow and the spruce tree. The teeth in the skull enabled the identification of the remains as being Schleyer. There wasn't much more of his body found. Since there was quite a bit of grisly excrement in the area, it fueled the speculation that Schleyer had been unexpectedly killed and eaten by a bear, as what happened with the famous Timothy Treadwell, whose death was captured in a documentary by Werner Herzog in 2006 called Grizzly Man, based on left behind video footage. And amongst some of the samples taken, the bear scat had bone fragments but no fabric. In Treadwell's case, not only human remains were found in the bear stomach contents, but also large amounts of his clothing. Most of Schleyer's clothes were never found. But searchers were skeptical it was a bear attack. First, there was no sign of a death struggle. No vegetation or ground was disturbed. The remains were found in a little patch of sparse spruce lying on the moss, and if a bear killed him here, this would be highly unusual, as they usually bury their kills in a cache. The remains of Treadwell and his girlfriend were found in such a cache after they were killed, but there was no cache anywhere in the area for Schleyer. Even if he started off playing dead, a recommended tactic for surviving a grizzly bear attack, friends said he would have known that if an animal continued the attack, the only chance for survival would be to fight back. And generally speaking, a bear attack is prolonged and violent. A friend said, "I think the least likely scenario is some sort of surprise encounter, but it's hard for me to imagine having a bear sneak up on him." And almost everyone who knew Schleyer believed he was simply too good a woodsman, too alert while in the forest, to have a bear catch him by surprise like that. Not to mention, his hat was completely untouched, and if one bear had, it's even harder to imagine the animal killing him without leaving signs of a struggle on a site covered with soft, easily disturbed moss. Bear attacks go on for a long time. The audio tape of Treadwell's death goes on for a very prolonged time, recording the sounds of him being eaten alive. The balaclava contained little blood and hair, and his pants even less. And if a bear attacks a man, it won't remove his pants without them being shredded and soaked in blood. Normally, bears grab the end, especially when attacking from behind, causing profuse bleeding. So why wasn't his balaclava soaked in blood? The plastic container that held his food had not been disturbed. Bear experts say that if a grizzly had killed Schleyer, it is likely the same bear would have gone to the camp given the proximity and even eat through the canned food. Everything points to the evidence being scavenging related and not caused by a violent direct attack. Many agree that the circumstances of his disappearance are very strange, even if they disagree with the cause. Bridget Parker, a spokeswoman for the Mounties and Whitehorse, said the case remains open, but the organization leans towards the idea that Schleyer was attacked and killed by a bear. There's no foul play suspected, she said. Everything at the scene suggested a bear attack and did not suggest foul play. Even for an experienced woodsman, some believe that a predatory bear could sneak up on him and deliver a fatal bite. But the Vancouver pathologist who examined Schleyer's remains found no tooth punctures in his skull, nor indications of scratch marks from teeth. When bears attack people, they almost always go for the head.